Welcome back to PJGH Education. My name is Stephen, and today we are continuing our series on the Acts of the Apostles. This is Acts chapter 11, verse 27 to chapter 12, verse 5, episode number 21. It's time to go. So, in the previous episodes, we have Peter preaching the gospel to the first Gentile convert, that is the household of Cornelius. The Spirit of God was poured out upon them, and they began to speak in tongues, and they were praising God. And so Peter knew immediately what that meant. That meant that God had is now accepting Gentiles on the basis of the faith in Jesus Christ. No longer is it about whether you're a Jew or you're a Gentile, or whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised, or whether you obey the kosher food or keep the Sabbath laws. No, none of those stuff. Now, acceptance by God is on the basis of faith in Jesus Christ. Salvation is by grace through faith now for both Jew and Gentile. And so now Peter then had to go back to Jerusalem and defend this position, and he defended it very, very well, very, very eloquently. And the church in Jerusalem acknowledged the truth, the veracity of this, that God has indeed accepted Gentiles also on the basis of faith, and not on whether you are a Jew or whether you are a Gentile, what cultural practices you practice, but faith in Jesus Christ. And then the story moves on to the church in Antioch, where there were this fellowship of both Jews and Gentiles who meet together as themselves, not requiring that the Gentiles become Jewish, take on Judaism, whether it's circumcision, food laws, Sabbath, those kind of things, but rather they come together in the name of Christ, and they're so different from anything else that people have seen before this, so that there the disciples were the first to be called Christians. And Paul or Saul of Tarsus and Barnabas ministered there for a year. And so we pick up the story from there to it's time to go. Chiasmus structure. Now this is the chiasmus structure is a literary structure that the writers of the Bible really love to use. It's all over the Bible, and if you know chiasmus structure, you're sensitive to it. You know what you're looking for, and you find it, it will go a long way to helping you to read the Bible. Basically, chiasm comes from the Greek alphabet chi, which is basically looks like an X. And right here we have A, B, C, X, and then you have C prime, B prime, A prime. So X in the middle, that is the chi in the chiasm. That is the main point in this whole literary structure. So it kind of like a ring structure, whereby the top is uh, reflected in the bottom, and then the second last, so on and so forth. So, for example, with A, Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas go from Antioch to Jerusalem, chapter 11, verse 27 to 30. And then in A prime, at the bottom in black, Paul and Barnabas return to Antioch with John Mark. And this is how we know that this whole thing is a literary unit, and should be read and studied together. And we have B, King Herod persecutes the church. And then we have B prime, King Herod dies. And we have C, Peter is rescued from prison. And C prime, Peter leaves for another place, and right smack in the middle, X, the chi. Peter goes to John Mark's house and hands the leadership of the church in Jerusalem over to James. And John Mark here in the chi, in the X, marks the spot. John Mark, that is also his name is also repeated at the bottom in A prime. Paul and Barnabas returns to Antioch with John Mark. So this whole thing is very, very well written, very, very well designed, and it's aimed to tell a story that it's time for Peter to go, hand the leadership of the church in Jerusalem over to James, quit the area, and go to another place, go into Gentile territory. You have seen how God is now working among the Gentiles through the conversion of Cornelius' household, you saw that firsthand. It is now time to go, and this whole structure really convinces Peter that that is the case. So let's go straight into it. Now, in these days, prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. So there's the church in Antioch and the church in Jerusalem, and there's healthy and regular fellowship between these two churches. And one of them, named Agabus, stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there will be a great famine over all the world. This took place in the days of Claudius. So, Agabus, a prophet, foretold that there will be a great famine worldwide. It has to be during the reign of Emperor Claudius. So, there is one particular year, the year 45, where there was a famine and Judea was greatly affected. So, the disciples determined, each one according to his ability, to send relief to the brothers living in Judea. And they did so, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Saul. And over here on the right hand side, we have Claudius. He reigned from 41 to 54 AD. And the disciples in Antioch, consisting of Jews and Gentiles, showed their generosity to the exclusively Jewish church in Jerusalem through their representatives, Barnabas and Saul. So, this wonderful, regular, healthy fellowship between these two churches. Now, about that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. Herod the king. Which Herod are we talking about? There are so many Herods in the Bible. This is Herod Agrippa the first, and that's a coin of his. Herod Agrippa the first. He reigned from 41 to 44 common era. He's the son of Aristobulus the fourth and grandson of Herod the Great. Later we'll meet Herod Agrippa the second, but this is Herod Agrippa the first. He was granted the tetrarchy of Galilee and Perea after the banishment of his lousy uncle Herod Antipas, who didn't really know how to rule. In the year 41, he supported Claudius in the Roman succession struggles, and he basically backed the right horse, and so he was rewarded with kingship over Judea and Samaria by the emperor. He's an ardent adherent of Judaism to the approval of the Jewish people. Josephus tells us about this in his book Jewish Antiquities. You can search it up on the internet. And after the Passover of 44, what happened was that Josephus tells us that he had games performed in honor of his benefactor Claudius at Caesarea Maritima, and then during his speech, the people proclaimed him a god, the voice of a god, not of a man. And he did not stop the flattery. And immediately he came down with severe heart and abdominal pains and died 5 days later. So basically, Acts more or less says the same thing, but Josephus also mentioned this particular event. So, Herod Agrippa, he laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And this was shocking, isn't it? This is really shocking because what does he do? He persecutes the church for political knowledge. It is not ideological. It is not that he hated the church or anything. It was just to score political brownie points, because in the next phrase says, when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. So Herod killing of James, the brother of John, son of Zebedee. This is shocking news. James, the brother of John, son of Zebedee. I mean, he played some important role in the gospel. In the gospel of Luke, he had a role, and all of a sudden he's killed right here. And um, it's shocking because as the reader, you see that the gospel is spreading. Um, Jesus asked his apostles to be his witnesses from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And it seems that it is working. Yes, there was the martyrdom of Stephen, but it served to even greater uh, um, uh, uh, forward march of the gospel. But here we have the death of an apostle, an important apostle, and so, but Luke just reported it in a straightforward manner, and so he proceeded to arrest Peter, also because he saw that his actions against the church in Jerusalem very well received by the Jewish religious establishment. He wants to score brownie points, and he arrests Peter. Now this continues throughout church history, and even today many Christians suffer as a result of politicians thinking that by doing that they would gain power, by doing that they would please the constituents, and that is why many Christians suffer all over the world today. Not something new. It happened right 2,000 years ago at the beginning phases of the church. And this arrest, it takes place during the days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That is the feast associated with Passover. This was during the days of unleavened bread, and when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to four squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer was for him was made to God by the church. So let's talk a little bit about Passover and Herod Antipas and the whole Herodian family. So just as Herod Antipas played important roles in the death of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ, now Herod Agrippa is persecuting the church. The Herodian family and the Christian movement, kind of like intricately linked together, usually in the form of the Herodians persecuting God's people. The Passover is associated with the crucifixion of Jesus. Peter also died on the day of Passover or around Passover. Would this happen to him? This feast of unleavened bread, but Passover is also associated with the Exodus narrative, and we're gonna take a look at how uh, Luke breaks out this Exodus narrative from the from this particular episode. We're gonna see it's really wonderful. Why did Herod Agrippa do this? He designs the arrest, imprisonment, and potentially execution of Peter to gain public approval. He wants to bring Peter out to the people after Passover, but the church was praying. Church makes earnest prayer to God for Peter, interceding for him. Now, when Herod was about to bring him out on that very night, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries before the door were guarding the prison. How come there's so many details here? Probably these details came from Peter himself. Did Luke interview Peter? I'm not sure. I don't I don't know. Maybe I'll choose I don't think so. But he may have a friend who very close to Peter, and that would be John Mark. And this story, this whole thing probably came, in my opinion, came from John Mark, and who basically heard from Peter, his close associate, a disciple of Peter at some point. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, "Dress yourself, get up quickly, dress yourself, put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." What is this? This is choke filled with the story from Exodus. This is Peter's deliverance, but it is also Peter's Exodus. Exodus chapter 12, verse 11. "In this manner you shall eat of the Passover lamb, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." And then you're going to follow this pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. This is your Exodus. This is your deliverance. Now, if this was Peter's Exodus, who's Pharaoh? Where is Egypt? And that is something that we have to keep in mind. And when he went out, and followed him, he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they had, because he's been seeing many visions, and maybe this was one of it. When they had passed the first and the second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord, and they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. So that is his Exodus story. It's like going through the sea opened up on its own accord, and now we have the gates opening up on its own accord. And when Peter came to himself, he said something very interesting, not from Exodus, interestingly. He says something from elsewhere. He said, now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting. Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod. Now, this phrase, the Lord sent his angel and rescued, this comes from Daniel chapter 3, verse 28. So this wasn't just Peter's exodus, this was also Peter's exile. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said in Daniel chapter 3, verse 28. This is after he threw his throne, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace because they refused to bow down before the idol, refused to bend the knee. So threw them in, but then one like the Son of Man appeared. So there's four of them and something like that, and then came out unscathed. And as a result, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent who sent the Lord. The Lord has sent his angel and delivered his servants." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Peter applies that to himself. The Lord has sent his angel and rescued me, not from Nebuchadnezzar, not from Babylon. These are traditional enemy figures. If you think about the Bible, the enemy figures, there will be Pharaoh and Egypt, and also Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. And here in this passage, in this structure, we have Peter explaining that this is both Passover, that is Exodus, and at the same time, it is also exile. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted in him, set aside the king's command, yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. And so Pharaoh, Egypt, that is really kind of like the type of the bad guy, right? That's a bad guy in the Bible, and he is kind of mirrored by Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. So together, these two just form these enemies of Israel. And now, right now, who's the enemies of God's people? Not Pharaoh, not Nebuchadnezzar, but Herod and the Sanhedrin, the old leaders of Israel. And where is Egypt? Babylon? No, it's in the Holy Land itself. And this has a remarkable impact on Peter. When he realized this, he acted decisively. Now, this phrase "realizing," "sunidon," no, well, it's like you finally comprehend something. And that what did he comprehend? He comprehended, he understood that the old leaders of Israel are just the same as Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar. And being in the Holy Land is no different from being in Egypt and Babylon. Thus far, he has not ventured out of the Holy Land. Maybe he's holding out hope for something in his background. This is his people, he's patriotic. He really wants to bring the gospel to all of God's people in the Holy Land. But now he come to the realization that Egypt, Babylon, Holy Land, Rome, or Antioch, or Corinth, or anywhere else, it is just the same story. And so he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where there is a gathering of believers to pray. So he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name was Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. So the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where is that house? Well, it could be the venue of the Last Supper. Look at Luke chapter 22, verse 7 to 13. Then came the days of unleavened bread. Interesting. Unleavened bread, Passover. That was the story of Jesus Christ, and now we have the story of Peter. Same kind of event, really. The which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They said to him, "Where will you have us prepare it?" He said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you." A man carrying a jar of water, that is an unusual scene. Usually, carrying jars of water, that is the work that is assigned to women. So a man carrying a jar of water, that is some kind of a code, right? Some kind of a signal for you. It's a bit secretive. Follow him into the house. Who is this man carrying a jar of water? I think it's probably John Mark himself. Follow him into the house that he enters. That is, if this was the house of Mary, then that would be his mother's house. And tell the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished, prepare it there. And they went and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. It is probably, if that is the case, that is probably also the same venue of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the Mount called Olivet. This is Acts chapter 1, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day journey away. And when they had entered, they went up to the upper room, right? Upper room in Luke 22, upper room right here, where they were staying. All these with one accord were devoting themselves to prayer. So the house of Mary is also a house of where people gather together to pray. So when the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. So basically, the value of the Last Supper, the value of the outpouring of the Holy Church, is definitely a meeting place, if not the primary meeting place of the church in Jerusalem. So when he knocked at the door of the gateway, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. Recognizing Peter's voice in her joy, she did not open the gate but ran in and reported that Peter was standing at the gate. And they said to her, "You are out of your mind." I mean, wait a minute, haven't you been praying? All this while you've been praying for Peter. God, please release Peter. Oh Lord, please save Peter. And then now the Lord says, "Peter." Peter shows up at the door and said, "Nah, that cannot be. I mean, do you really believe in what you're praying? Do you believe in the God to whom you offer your prayer? You shouldn't be too surprised, should you?" But they were really taken by surprise. In fact, they said, "You are out of your mind. You're crazy. It could not be Peter." But she kept insisting that it was Peter, and I kept saying, "Well, it is angel." I mean, you would rather say that it is Peter's angel, something more outlandish. Don't you think it was more okay? So it's something so outlandish. They would rather go for it's his angel, something so bizarre than it was really Peter. They really couldn't believe their ears. What they were hearing from Rhoda, although they have been praying. And this is really a lesson to us about our prayer life, isn't it? We should really trust in the Lord. But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. He describes to the believers the manner in which the Lord had brought him out of the prison, and what he realized, what he learned in the process, about Exodus, about exile, and about Egypt, and about Babylon, and about the Holy Land, about Pharaoh, about Nebuchadnezzar, about Herod and the Sanhedrin. And he said, "Tell these things, these same things to James and to the brothers." And then he departed and went to another place. He charges them to relay the message to James, hand over the leadership of the church in Jerusalem to him and the other leaders of the church in Jerusalem. He departs from there to go to another place. Where did he go? Well, Antioch. Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 to verse 14, that this unhappy episode that Paul recalled. But when Cephas, that is Peter, came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, James the brother of Jesus here, not James the brother, or I should have said that tell these things to James. This James is the James the brother of Jesus, not James the brother of John, who have just been murdered by Herod. Agrippa the first. So this is for before certain man came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles. Peter had done this before. He ate with Cornelius' household, and now he's in Antioch, and there is Jews and Gentiles, and the Gentiles would eat like how Gentiles would eat, and he was eating with them. He didn't wasn't too concerned about keeping distance from them. But when there came this man from James, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision party. And the rest of the Jews in Antioch acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas, Paul's best friend and his partner in the gospel, was led astray by their hypocrisy. And this will play a big role subsequently in chapter 15, I think, when we get there. But when I saw that their conduct was not in step the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them, or if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile, hey, you know the truth. In fact, we learn the truth from you about God accepting Gentiles on the basis of faith. Why are you now suddenly, shrinking back when people from James come back? Nonetheless, where did Peter go? He went to Antioch. That is the most natural place to go because that is where people were first called Christians. He realized that there is this Jews Gentiles thing, and then there is this uh, Exodus and this exile, Nebuchadnezzar, Pharaoh, Herod. He understood that God is not about any particular place. No place is extra special. No people, but God wants to make disciples, want them to make disciples of all the nations, to be his witnesses. Yes, first in Jerusalem, in Judea, Samaria, but then to the ends of the earth. And Antioch will be the most natural place to go. There is already a church that is missional, sending missionaries out, and that will be a most suitable place. But why didn't uh, Luke says he departed and went to Antioch? Why say he departed and went to another place? But before we talk about that, eventually Peter ended up in Rome. First Peter chapter 5 verse 13, where he was martyred by not by Herod, but by the emperor himself, Nero. So she who is in Babylon, Babylon, which is a code word for Rome. So basically, Egypt, Babylon, Rome, same thing. Jerusalem is all the same. Chosen together with you, sends you her greetings, and so does my son Mark. And now we can see how everything comes together. So again, why he departed and went to another place, not to Antioch, is so that it doesn't mess up the flow of the story, because we're going to take a look at that in a little bit. And when they came, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. And after Herod searched for him, did not find him, examined the sentries, and ordered that they should be put to death. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and spent time there. Josephus told us that he went there in order to, in honor of Claudius. At Caesarea Maritima, and he gave a speech. Now, Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they sued for peace because the country depended on the king's country for food. So most likely this event might have happened before the 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 famine, but literally Luke put them side by side in a chiastic structure in order to make a theological point, because if um, if there was a famine, then Tyre and Sidon could not have depended on Herod Agrippa for food. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, delivered an oration to them, and the people were shouting, "The voice of a God and not of a man." Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. According to Josephus, he died 5 days later. But the word of God increased and multiplied. This is basically a bookend, the chapter 12, verse 24, 25. But the word of God increased and multiplied. So this is basically the red section under the Cornelius section. Basically, the gospel has reached to the Gentiles in Cornelius. The gospel has reached to Antioch, to this church consisting of both Jews and Gentiles. And Peter is ready to go. He's ready to leave Jerusalem for for Antioch and to the ends of the earth. So this kind of like puts us in position for the next phase of the gospel, which is to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth, beginning with the first missionary journey. And that sets up to set that up. We have uh, chapter 12, verse 25. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had completed their service, bringing with them John, whose other name was Mark. So, and after that, we were going to have Barnabas and Saul of Tarsus in the first missionary journey from Antioch. And I guess the reason why Luke says he went to another place instead of say Antioch is because that would really mess with the flow of the story, because from this point forward, um, Luke wants to focus on the ministry of Barnabas and Saul that from Antioch, and you're going to throw in Peter into the mix. It's just going to make everything complicated, right? Even as he's telling you the story of Barnabas and Saul, at the back of your mind, you'll be thinking, what's Peter doing at Antioch, right? I want to know what is his story, but we're not going to get back to Peter anytime soon. So I think that this is the reason why instead of mentioning Antioch, he went to another place. But the point is that he left. He left. It's time to go. And many of us, maybe it's time for us to go. Maybe God is calling us to a different job. Maybe God is calling us to a different place, a different stage in life, a different ministry. But maybe there's something in our background that say there's something really special here. But actually, if you really look into it, then you say, wait a minute, you know, Jerusalem, well, Egypt, Babylon, Jerusalem, Rome, wherever God sent me, where I don't need to have a special place. Well, we all have our preferences, but ultimately we are all under. Uh, uh, we are all God's workers, and the Lord sent us to whichever job that we're supposed to work. The Lord sent us to whichever place that we're supposed to live. The Lord sent us to whichever ministry we're supposed to serve, and wherever we go, we want to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the ends of the earth. And so, is it time for you to go? Is God calling you somewhere? Is there something in your background, in your culture, in your understanding, in your worldview that is stopping you from obeying the Lord? You need to be disabused from that. It is not a vision, this is reality. Maybe you should also come to, right? Or come to his senses for Peter. When he come to that deep realization, then he understood that it was time to go. And so that's all we have for today. And I hope to see you in the next episode.